all for being here today to celebrate the launch of Onto 2050. I'm thrilled to report that the plan was adopted this morning by the CMAP board and our MPO policy committee. That's right, that deserves a hand. It's so good to see so many friendly faces in the crowd. For those of you who don't know me, I am Joe Szabo, the Executive Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And today's program will focus on Onto 2050's goals, our region's goals, and how together we can achieve those goals. And on that topic, you'll hear from a number of speakers, and I'd like to thank all of them for being a part of our big day. Our keynote speaker, Clarence Anthony, traveled here from Washington, D.C., where he's the CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. And I know you're going to be inspired by Clarence's thoughts on how metropolitan Chicagoland can continue to seize our own destiny. I'd also like to thank our panelists for today, DuPage County Chairman Dan Cronin, Civic Federation President Lawrence Masal, Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, Resurrection Project CEO Raul Ramundo, RTA Executive Director Leanne Redden, and Vice President of External Affairs and Large Customer Services at ComEd, Melissa Washington. Also want to thank our MC for today and our panel moderator, ABC 7 news anchor Judy Sue. Judy is a multiple Emmy Award-winning journalist who's no stranger to asking the tough questions, and so I know she's going to keep our panelists on their toes. Also want to thank Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Palos Hills Mayor Gerald Bennett, who also serves as CMAP's board chair. Mayor Emanuel and Mayor Bennett will highlight the unique and shared roles that Chicago and the suburbs can play in our region's future. We'll also hear today from some very special young people who represent the region's next generation. John Hatcher Jr., a high school student from Sauk Village, and also the a cappella choir from the Lindblom Academy in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. Also want to give special recognition to the many elected officials who have joined us today. You elected officials, you play a vital role by governing at the local, state, and federal levels. And CMAP appreciates all of you for providing input to the plan and encouraging your constituents to do the same. We look forward to continuing to partner with you to implement Onto 2050. So would all the elected officials please stand to be recognized? Thank you. Let me also recognize our transportation partners and service board members for their contributions to Onto 2050. And together, I'm really looking forward to how we can achieve that safe and reliable transportation system for tomorrow. Can the transportation partners stand, please? And also let me thank the number of supporters who over the past 3 years have really helped support and give that meaning to our work for Onto 2050. Some applause for the funders. And one special note for today, it also happens to be the birthday of both our keynote speaker, Mr. Anthony, and CMAP's chair, Mayor Bennett, and this is also the eve of CMAP's birthday. So please join us at the end of the event today for some cake. Very special day. But what brings us here today really is a weightier matter, and that is the future of our region. And over the last decade, Chicagoland has experienced significant changes. According to many measures, our progress has stalled for reasons that are complex, but by no means irreversible. And the future promises for us even more substantial shifts. We're going to have to rebuild and modernize aging roads and bridges and transit systems at a time when people's travel habits are changing. Uncertainties about the state's fiscal condition and federal priorities mean that we're going to have to fund our own needs. For the entire region's economic growth, we have to take proactive steps to include disinvested communities and their residents in our economy. And as climate changes at the global scale, and as new technology continues to reshape the nature of work, commerce, and decision-making, we're going to have to be more resilient. By addressing these challenges and building on our many resources, our region can make real progress towards broad, lasting prosperity and quality of life. That's why the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning exists, and it's why our board this morning adopted ON2 2050. In developing this plan, CMEP spent nearly 3 years working with partners to conduct extensive research. We engaged more than 100,000 of our residents across the entire 7-county region and city of Chicago. ON2 2050 builds on its predecessor, GO2 2040, which was adopted in 2010 as the region's first comprehensive regional plan after CMAP was created. And our planning process identified 3 clear principles: inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment. So let me take a moment to speak about each one of these principles, which informs every ON2 2050 recommendation. First, inclusive growth. Regions that offer economic opportunity for residents regardless of race, income, or background enjoy longer, stronger periods of prosperity and fewer, shorter periods of economic stagnation. Metropolitan Chicago simply cannot thrive when so many people and places are left behind. And despite our many enviable assets, our region is falling short of ensuring economic opportunity for all residents in all communities. And so for a stronger future, our region needs to ensure that every resident and community can fully contribute to and benefit from the economy. Currently, too much of our region's human capital, the talents and skills of excluded residents, is being wasted. But by taking deliberative steps, together we can make progress towards inclusive growth across all of our communities and neighborhoods. Paired with strategies to capitalize on the region's economic assets, inclusive economic initiatives will help restart long-term growth. So it's about acting together to make sure that we work to open the doors in communities where opportunity hasn't knocked for generations. Priority number 2, resilience. To remain strong, the region requires communities, infrastructure, and systems that can thrive in the face of future environmental, economic, and technological changes. By achieving resilience, our communities can better recover from the acute shocks and chronic stressors that are going to keep hitting us. We have to prepare to rebound quickly from weather events, including stronger storms and frequent flooding. Infrastructure has to be designed to resist extreme temperatures, to mitigate flooding, and to ensure reliable transportation in all seasons. But resilience refers to so much more than just climate change. Communities need the capacity, the revenue, staff, equipment, and other resources to effectively meet their residents' needs as change continues to accelerate. By pooling resources, using new technologies, and training staff, resilient municipalities can provide essential services even as federal and state support continues to diminish. Our region's communities must also prepare as global markets spur transition to new types of work in emerging industries. The strategies proposed in ON2 2050 will help our region and communities adapt to future challenges, both those that we know and those that are unknown, that are driven by climate, commerce, technology, and other factors. Priority number 3, prioritize investment. As federal and state funding becomes less sufficient year by year, we have to ensure prioritized investment for infrastructure, development, and the economy to maximize the benefits from these limited funds. It's most effective to maintain and modernize existing systems before considering limited expansion. And so our highest priority has to be addressing the vast backlog of transportation, water, and other infrastructure in need of repair or replacement. Onto 2050 identifies a number of alternatives to our states and regions' antiquated sources of revenue. And we must ensure that funding methods are sustainable and flexible enough to operate and maintain a modern transportation system as needs continue to evolve from emerging technologies. But prioritized investment extends beyond just transportation infrastructure. For decades, funding of public services and infrastructure at all levels of government has been stagnant or diminishing, and yet costs continue to rise. Coordinating investment broadly, linking transportation to housing, or targeting public expenditures to attract private resources is essential. We owe it to the public to spend our limited dollars wisely. And above all, prioritized investment requires close coordination across agencies responsible for providing technical assistance or the selecting of projects based on clear, measurable objectives. So now it's time for a little video, and in this short video, you'll hear about the plan and its principles in the words of some of our fellow residents who are counting on us to implement onto 2050.
The Chicago region has a history of seizing our destiny by building on our strengths. But current trends show we are falling behind peer regions. On to 2050 offers near and long-term solutions to shape a brighter future for all residents and communities of Chicagoland. The plan has 3 guiding principles: inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment. To thrive, our region cannot continue leaving so many people and communities behind.
If people don't have the opportunity to be economically stable, they don't have the opportunity to build a life for themselves, where they constantly have to dream small. I feel like that's a problem that should affect us all.
You know, we can stay in a community if we have the resources.
Inclusive regions have longer, stronger periods of prosperity. We must provide economic opportunity for everyone and open doors in communities where opportunity hasn't knocked for generations.
A solution to poverty is programs that introduce young people to life-changing careers like manufacturing and engineering.
Rapid economic, environmental, and technological changes are posing risks and opportunities.
We're not in it by ourselves. What we do in Midlothian affects the communities around us. What they do affects us.
To be more resilient, we must build on our region's strengths.
When you get a group of people together who want to be productive, I think that's what you'll be.
Crumbling pavement and leaky water pipes keep piling up as repair costs rise and funding becomes more uncertain.
In certain areas, there's lack of sidewalks currently. That could be a problem, whether you have a disability or not.
To make the most of every precious dollar spent, we need to maintain and improve what we already have. And we need to work together to invest in clear priorities. On to 2050 is our region's plan for succeeding together.
On to 2050 will make it easier for all of us to get around.
On to 2050 will help our region reduce flooding.
On to 2050 will help make sure everyone can succeed.
On to 2050 will make my future brighter.
The plan starts now. Learn more at cmap.illinois.gov/2050.
And now, I'd like to introduce ABC 7's Judy Sue to take it from here. Judy, the program is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to move from the podium to my audio guys since I have a mic on. I think that's okay. I get the thumbs up. Congratulations, Joe, for adopting On to 2050. I know that information, by the way, was embargoed for the media until just half an hour ago, so now you all can kind of dive into it and see what the team has been working on for the last 3 years. And also, Joe, congratulations on starting this event on time. I don't know how many events I have done with elected officials, and we don't usually get started on time, so that's terrific. Can I just tell you how impressive this crowd is? As I was standing there while you were all looking at the video, I had a chance to preview that video, and I was looking out at the crowd. You are 1,000 strong here, Mandy tells me, 1,000 strong, representing so many different municipalities in our greater Chicago region. And you know, I was thinking on the way over here, at a time when we do see so many stories on TV, on radio, in the papers, online, about perhaps stories that divide us, it is so great and impressive to see all of you coming together, more than 1,000 strong, to work towards the future and on to 2050. So congratulations on being here, and to CMAP as well. Let me just tell you a little bit more about myself in case you don't watch ABC7 on a regular basis. I sure hope you do. My name is Judy Sue. I'm a news anchor with the station. I've been with ABC7 going on 17 years. I know that's hard to believe. I actually came to the station 17 years ago, pregnant with my first child. I have 4 now. We were last night, in fact, with my husband, talking with my oldest about college. He's a junior in high school. He will be in the graduating class of 2020. Think about that. I remember when we were all freaking out about Y2K, right? I mean, that's what all the media outlets were talking about, and we were okay. But that's how far the planning takes. You know, that time marches on. So Chicago is my adopted hometown. I was born in Taiwan. My family immigrated here when I was 11 years old. We landed right in Chicago's Chinatown. I didn't speak a word of English. We lived in Chinatown for a little bit. We lived in Rogers Park. I went to Chicago Public Schools. And then eventually my family moved to Morton Grove, Skokie. I graduated from Niles West High School, went down to U of I in Champaign-Urbana and studied broadcast journalism. Woo! Did I hear U of I? All right. It was always my goal and my dream to work as a broadcast journalist in our great city of Chicago. I worked in Champaign for about a year, went out to San Diego, California, worked as a reporter anchor there for about 6 years, and eventually got this great opportunity to come back home to anchor at ABC7. And I also just have to share with you, today I get to anchor the 4 p.m. news and the 6 p.m. news, 2 newscasts that I watched when I was that young immigrant girl looking up at the television set, ABC7 when I came home, dreaming of pursuing this one day. So I guess you can say I've come full circle. And thrilled to be here with you today. I have 4 kids, as I mentioned, 2 boys, 2 girls. My oldest is 17. I have a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a little 8-year-old. And I have to share with you that my youngest one, I still get asked this all of the time, were you the news anchor who had a baby on the expressway? That was me. Who remembers that story? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was me. So I have a soft spot for infrastructure. That's why I was invited here today to speak. For those of you who may not know, there's a nice little pull-out right by Cicero. Drove by it this morning. In case you need to have a baby, you can pull right out. Emergency vehicles go down and they back up, and that's what happened that morning. Just couldn't make it to Northwestern on time. Made the front page news, not intending to. But truly, and then I was thinking, so my little baby Ike, we affectionately call him. I know. I thought about giving that to him as his name. I just couldn't do it. So that's just his little nickname we call him. But when I was thinking about on to 2050, how old he would be in 2050, he would be 40 years old, my little baby Ike. I mean, that's mind-boggling to think, right? That's what you all are tasked with. That's the challenge that all of you have a hand in. It is an awesome challenge, but it is such a serious responsibility. So my hat's off to all of you. I'm just here to moderate. I just get to ask the questions. You all are charged with coming up with the solutions and the answers. So keep that in mind. Truly, hats off to all of you for being here today. But to that end, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker now on stage, who jokingly said next to me when Joe mentioned his birthday, he said, wow, I don't get birthday cakes anymore, but you will today. You will today. So Clarence Anthony is the CEO and executive director of the National League of Cities, the largest and oldest organization serving as an advocate for and a resource to America's cities and all of their leaders. Talk about an awesome responsibility. He began his career as at an organization not so different from CMAP, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council in Florida. And there he learned the value of regional planning and the importance of partnership between all levels of government and the private sector. And those lessons stuck with him when at the age of 24, at the age of 24, he became one of the youngest mayors in Florida history. Congratulations for that. He went on to serve the city of South Bay, Florida for 24 years. Mr. Anthony has dedicated his entire life to public service, civic engagement, and helping other city and regional leaders make their communities stronger and more economically vibrant. We are so privileged to have you here with us today. Please welcome to the podium Mr. Clarence Anthony.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
Good morning, Chicagoland. How y'all doing? All right, we're here to celebrate. This is an amazing opportunity, and what Judy didn't tell you is that she's spending her anniversary with us today. And so there's a lot of celebration going on here today, but this is such an important moment that we all just stop and pause and reflect on where we are as a community, where we are as a region. And this region is referred to as the motto as the I will region. I will make this happen. I will focus on results. And so as you reflect on this region, you also have to know that there are so many great things going on in this region that kids are right now looking at Chicago as a place that they want to come. They'd like to live. They'd like to create opportunities for themselves and their lives. And this theme really came about after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And it originated at a time where you look back, October 8th through 10th were the 2 days that it all happened. So this is really a neat time that we look at where we are and recommit to that I will motto that was created 147 years ago. This region is an amazing global place where events, the World Fair, the World Columbian Exposition, but also I can tell you every day this region has a new show coming on TV. Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, my wife told me another one, Chicago PD. Next is going to be Chicago, the World Dance something. I don't know. But every week there's a show about the region. What that tells you is that there's a lot happening. But then yesterday I was walking down Michigan Ave, and I walked past this bust that really inspired me and changed what I was going to talk about a little bit today. And it was a bust of Baptiste Pont du Sable, a person of African descent, Haiti-born, that came to Chicago and settled, one of the first settlers of Chicago. And he was a person of strong I will determination that made sure that he left his mark in this region. He was successful in establishing the first trading post in this region, the first person to have that determination that we're going to settle here and make Chicago region our home. And it's a story that's rich in history. It's a story that's rich in the legacy of the Chicagoland region. And it's a story that we must tell all around America, because that is the way Chicago is, and that's what we got to continue to recreate through this On to 2050 plan. You have unmatched architecture and music, technology, telecommunications, and you even have good baseball teams in the region as well. But most of all, and I want you to recognize this, you have an amazing interest in collaborating, elected officials on the county, city, villages, state level, that want to make sure that we're engaged as stakeholders and the outcomes are implementable. So if we look at this I will concept, we could also reflect on the first mayor of Chicago, Mayor Ogden. He was committed to modernizing the transit system. He was committed to making sure our water and wastewater systems were functioning. And of course, there were a lot of people fighting, saying that this is not necessary for this region. This is not important that we become the hub of the freight systems around America. But he did not stop. He made sure that the third largest city in America, in the United States of America, is known as a preeminent freight hub in North America. So today, it's important that we recognize a lot about the past, but you know, 2020 is about the future. And the plan itself is an amazing plan because it wasn't created in an office. It wasn't created in one of these towers. It was created from the ground up. It was created engaging the young people throughout the region. The fifth graders who's going to adopt this plan, they'll be 45 years old when the 2050 plan actually starts to be implemented. Just think about that. Look around this room and you will see the young college students and the young people that we are creating this plan for. But the other thing is it recognizes your problems that you have in the area. And that's bold. I will tell you, that's really bold. You're recognizing that your infrastructure is aging, and much of it is past its usability. You recognize that extreme events, whether it's heat or flooding, can destroy the community. You recognize that inequity is growing in the Chicago region. You can see it in widespread racial division, economic disparity in the region. You can trace it back to policies, whether they were intentional or not. Those policies created those inequities. You recognize that post-recession economic recovery has lagged in the region, while other regions have prospered. Populations have not grown as much as you would like it to grow. So we put a pin in those challenges, but I also must tell you, I travel around America, and this is not the only region that is having these challenges. This is not the only region that is identifying the fact that we need to come together as a region to address these unique issues. So the 3-year process that you've gone through to develop onto 2050 plan, it must, however, have a clear path toward being implementable and measured. If it's not measured, and if we don't come back and see where we've achieved some prosperity and some progress, then we will not be happy as a region. So I want to commend each and every one of you for being bold enough to say, we're not perfect, we have problems, but we're going to put a plan together to address those issues. The most important part of the plan is the ability to have a convener. And I hope that you will use CMAP as that convening organization. A convener is one that you got to trust. A convener is one that has the tools and the commitment to make this happen. If we have a convener in our region, we can make sure that we hold Joe responsible and the board responsible for the output of the progress that is made. One of the biggest challenges that you'll have in terms of this regional concept is that people oftentimes don't recognize that what goes on in Chicago impacts Naperville. The transportation system in Chicago will have an impact on Lake Forest, or Romeoville, or Aurora. We have to think regionally. If there's a police crisis in one community, it impacts the whole region. Roads don't stop in Chicago. They lead to somewhere else. So if we put our hats on as a region, we'll be very, very successful in making sure that this plan is implementable. As was noted, my first job was as a regional planner. And I can tell you, in Florida, there was not the recognition over 30 years ago that water doesn't stop at one city limit or one county. It was not the recognition. That roads, whether it's the Florida Turnpike or I-95, just didn't end at one county or one city. It took us over a decade to recognize that if we're going to plan for the future, we have to plan it together. And actually, we're seeing outcomes right now that are amazing by having a regional plan. But needless to say, it comes down to collaboration, unbiased policies, and again, that I will attitude, that we're going to be a part of history that's going to change our region once we leave here. This is not to say it's going to be easy, because we recognize, or Judy recognized, all the elected officials. So we know we're going to have to get all of our egos out of the way. No elected official has egos, I know that. But we're going to have to make sure that the city, towns, and villages in the region work together. The nonprofits have to have a role in what goes on in this plan. Civic leaders can't just sit back and be critical. Private sector has to step up and invest in communities that they have historically not invested in. That's very important that they recognize that. And most important, you gotta engage the residents. We can create all kinds of plans, but if we don't get the people at the table who have felt voiceless at times, then this plan is not going to be successful. It's on each of us and CMAP to make sure that we have the people at the table that are going to be impacted. We also have to recognize that at the local level, nonpartisanship is essential. Now, we see all of the issues that we see in Washington, D.C., where I work, but at the local level, we don't care about parties. It's not about Democrats or Republican, because I don't know anyone in this room who has called a fire truck and they come to your house and they ask you, are you Democrat or Republican? When your water comes through the faucet, it doesn't ask you whether you're Democratic or Republican. City officials, we don't have time. This region don't have time for partisan politics. We gotta make sure that we're representing all of the citizens, because if we do get involved in partisanship, then we're not gonna be successful in making sure that this plan comes to life. So we talk about the pillars, and Joe has talked about them a little bit. He's talked about inclusive growth. Inclusive growth means just what it is, making sure that we plan the educational systems, the public transit systems. We got to make sure that every person in this room feels as if the educational system is being developed for them. We got to make sure that the transportation system just don't stop in the wealthy communities, that is built in those communities that actually need that transportation system to get to their jobs. Quality housing, health care, no matter where you come from or your zip code, all of those things should be provided to you as a citizen of this region. And we can look around again and wake up to the reality that people of color are much more likely to have lower incomes and higher rates of unemployment. So when we say that, what does it mean? It means that this is the time for us as a region to attack the toughest issues. This is the time in our region to attack the toughest issues. When there's prosperity, we all celebrate. When there are challenges, sometimes we don't. Well, these challenges that I've noted, it is our opportunity as a region to fix. So part of it is putting a face on issues, a face on challenges. So let me put a face on inclusive growth and what it means. It's about people. It's about Dr. Lazaro Lopez. He's an associate superintendent learning and leading the Arlington Heights High School District. Dr. Lopez didn't always see himself as someone that would prosper in the region. He went on to the U.S. Army, and he came back to the region, and he couldn't find a job. He went from job to job trying to find where he fit in this region. He finally found himself at the community college, and ultimately he worked to get a PhD, a doctorate. Today, he oversees the school's district career paths program that helps students to find their way and their passion. He also chairs the Illinois Community College Board. He felt that there were limitations when he returned home. So his goal in his job now is to break down boundaries, to create opportunities, to solve problems. Because if people or kids in the community don't see opportunities and they only see barriers, they find themselves feeling hopeless. Inclusive growth is about the feeling of being engaged, the feeling of being included, the feeling that you can come back to your own region and be successful. The second principle is that of resilience. Even the word resilience brings about some inspiration and feeling. For me, resilience is about challenges that arise, economic challenges. It's like losing a major employer. Environmental challenges, like flooding and extreme heat. Financial challenges, like the next recession. The question to you is, how are you as a region going to respond to these challenges? Now, I mentioned that I'm from Florida. And right now, as we speak, Hurricane Michael is plummeting the coast of Florida. And the reason I tell you that is Florida is a resilient state because we almost expect that there is going to be a hurricane every year. We're prepared. What we will see, though, is that you will see destruction. You will see people that are homeless. You will see our water systems destroyed. But most of all, that's important, we have a plan. We have a plan of resilience. And I'm hoping that your plan of resilience will not only focus on environmental issues, but it'll also focus on creating new job opportunities that are not just technology jobs. It's a job where plumbers feel that they have an opportunity, mechanics. Because oftentimes we think about the future of work, we think about all of these innovation jobs. We need to also take care of our technical schools. We need to make sure opportunities are there for everybody that lives in the region. But you know what? Resiliency is also about city leaders stepping up. It's about Judy Kingma, Director of Economic Development and Planning in Park Forest. When her Mayor Ostenberg, told his team that he wanted to become a resilient community, the first thing that they did was to call CMAP and ask for local technical assistance. And then they created a 14-chapter roadmap to help the community reach its goal. But CMAP didn't just drop Hilda and the city and say good luck. They've continued to be a resource. I hope that you figure out that same strategy. What vision do you have in your region, in your city, in your neighborhood to be a resilient city? And I'm hoping that everyone in this room will be a part of your city's plan and then creating your regional plan. And the third pillar is the most difficult one. It is the prioritization of your investment. So it's always easy for us to say it's a priority. We know that we got aging infrastructure, that 24% of this region highways are unacceptable to ride on. We know that nearly 10% of the bridges are structurally deficient. And we know 21% of rail cars have exceeded their useful life. And we also recognize that right now we have a $24 billion funding gap. You know, it's, again, easy to identify these issues, but it's going to take each of us giving up dollars in our regional plans to fund the infrastructure needs that exist in the region. I'm reminded of a quote that Vice President Joe Biden has often said his father used. Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. So if you value equity and creating opportunities, I want to see you put the money there. If you value transportation, put the money there. If you value small and minority-owned business investment in communities that are underserved, put your money in those programs. Prioritization and coordination is going to be key. And other regions have, in fact, addressed these just like you have. Now, there's another story that is so heartwarming to me as I read the 2050 plan, On to 2050 plan. It's about Heather and Garland Armstrong. They are vocal advocates for the disability community. And it's a true testament to the I will commitment. I learned from reading about them that they spent hours trying to get to doctor's appointments, volunteering, public hearings. They've had to research train schedules to get where they want. They had to contact paratransit services to find their way around the region. I saw a story where Garland pushes Heather's wheelchair on the sidewalks where there were no sidewalks and try to find accessible taxis. That's not the region that we want to see in 2050. We want to see a region where every person feels as if they have an opportunity to get to a job. We need to invest in those programs. What we don't want to see is citizens giving up and not finding a way to their doctor's appointments, not finding a way to their jobs. So when the public dollars are spent, we need to make sure they're spent wisely and transparently. So at the end of the day, the purpose of the On to 2050 is improve the quality of life of the people that live in the region. But to me, the real purpose is to create a place called home. a place called home. Imagine that you live in the Chicagoland region and you don't have a job. Imagine that you don't have services to health care. Imagine that the transportation system is not in your neighborhood and don't get you to work. Imagine that the parks in your region, in your community, are not safe. Imagine that the police services is not equal. That's not a place that you're going to call home. It's just a place that you feel stuck. A place that you call home is a place that you drive into your yard because America says the one thing you want is the opportunity to own your own home, to drive in your garage and to park your own car in your own yard. A place you call home is a place that you can find a job, that you can not only find a job, but one that you can take care of your family. A place you call home is a safe place where you can take your kids out to the park and play, and they can grow up feeling as if they got this excitement about their neighborhood. If this plan is implemented the right way, and it will, you will create citizens and a region that people will say, that's where I live, and that's where I raise my kids, and that is my home. A place called home is what we're trying to do. And when we see communities around the nation destroy their community, we often hear the question on TV, why are they doing that to their own neighborhood? It's not their neighborhood if they don't have a job. It's not their neighborhood if they don't own the business in their community. No matter your color, your gender, your sexual orientation, no matter your party, you want to feel that the place you live is your home. And I want every decision maker, every community leader that's in this room, every stakeholder, every high school student to leave here with that I will attitude. I will make sure that this plan is developed and implemented. I will make sure that people in this region, in this community, live a better life because of this plan. And I will make sure that in 2050, the 45 years old that is living in the region will say, I too, and I will commit to a better Chicagoland region. Thank you all very much, and let's get to work.
Very well done. Happy birthday. Thank you, Clarence. Thank you so much. And it is so true. Until you have that vested interest, right? I saw a lot of nodding heads in our neighborhoods. That's when we start to cultivate that care, and we see it day after day. Thank you for laying out the 3 principles. We invite all of you to kind of keep that in mind as we continue this conversation on stage. We're going to start to fill up these chairs now. But before we do with our panel, we thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do. So we're talking about On to 2050, which is 32 years from now. We thought we would take you back a little bit. Think back to 32 years ago. How old were you? What was your hair like? What was your clothing like? And we have some pictures for you. So if you calculate back 32 years ago, we're talking about the year 1986. So think about that. 1986, cue the pictures, was when Oprah opened Harpo Studios in Chicago. It's coming. Ferris Bueller took his famous romp around our city. In 1986, Bears fans, what happened? The Super Bowl. I know, right? If we had planned a little better today, we would have cued the Super Bowl shuffle live on stage, but I'm not going to do it for you. Chicagoland was a familiar place, but also very different. We're going to show you pictures of the CTA. Do we have that? I remember taking the Skokie Swift to get on the red line at Howard. And then we have a picture of Navy Pier. That's what Navy Pier looked like. I know, right? Wow, very different than what we see on TV. Aurora, the Roundhouse. This is what the Roundhouse looked like back in 1986. I see a lot of jaws open, yeah. And we have a picture of Orland Park, right? Look at that. That is Orland Park from 1986. Safe to say, a lot has changed. So we're talking about looking ahead another 32 years from now. It is a little mind-boggling. So we also have a picture of our panelists from 1986. See if you can figure out who is who. There they are, and then our panelists here today. We are going to invite them to take the stage right now. Our expert panel, make your way on stage as I introduce all of you in no particular order, just come on stage. We have DuPage County Chairman Dan Cronin, Civic Federation President Lawrence Masal, Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle, the Resurrection Project CEO Raul Raimondo, and we also have Regional Transportation Authority Executive Director Leanne Redden and ComEd's VP of External Affairs and Large Customer Services, Melissa Washington. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of their bios. It is included in your program. Safe to say, judging from the pictures, all of them have been at it for quite some time. Good morning and welcome. How about a round of applause for our panel here? So I'm going to make my way and sit over here to our Cook County Board President and also our, all right. So, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going? Thank you so much for joining us. I know everybody has such a busy time. I apologize to our audience over here. I'm going to kind of look this way as we start this program. We're going to jump right into it. You guys have not read Onto 2050, correct? I have. No, they were not expected to read Onto 2050. But clearly, they all are aware and they all have a hand in shaping the future as we go ahead 32 years from now, and that is why they are all here. So we get a little exclusive insight really into what they're thinking and what they think the needs are as we look ahead 32 years from now. I'm going to start first with this question. It has to do with community reinvestment and government collaboration, which is something we often hear about, right? But how do we practically do it all? As more and more people want to live in communities that are walked to with transportation, shopping, childcare, parks, safety, as Clarence mentioned. I mean, there are a lot of needs. How do communities go through the next 32 years, fulfill not just their needs today, which is hard, and then look ahead 32 years from now? I'm actually going to start with Ray Raimondo from the community perspective. What do you think as we look ahead to 2050? The communities, how do we empower them, to be better?
I think it's important to understand that we're not just looking at needs and problems and challenges. And what the community can bring forward is what are the assets of those communities, both tangible and non-tangible assets. Planners, government knows a lot about the problems and challenges that exist, but community residents who live in those communities or in the region also can point out how can you build on other things that are working in the neighborhood, for example. And I think that's true of the region as a whole. I mean, we all say O'Hare is a tangible asset for the region. But every community has tangible assets and non-tangible assets. I think, for example, one of the non-tangible assets that is going to be very important moving forward is the diversity of the region, the diversity of communities. Already in the state of Illinois, Hispanics are the second largest population. If this plan would have been done in 1970 or more or less 50 years ago, it would have been more or less a black and white sort of narrative. Now it's very different, and I think that's an asset. And I think communities can bring that forward. I, like you, Judy, am an immigrant and have been living in the city of Chicago since 1972 and have contributed to the life of the community I live in, but also the community that I live in depends on what happens outside of Chicago, depends on what happens in other parts of the region. I have relatives who have moved down to Shorewood, to Joliet, and I live in the city of Chicago, and we interact with each other at the kitchen table on weekends, and we talk about what's going on in different communities. So we're all interconnected with each other, and that's what the community brings to the table to government officials. But the key is getting them synchronized with us, right? There's the government sector, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, and the community sector. And within each one, there's so many challenges, but also assets to build on.
Collaboration and compromise. I'm going to bring in Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. That seems pretty difficult nowadays in Washington. Not taking any sides here, just stating the fact. How do we make that happen here at home? We're talking about inclusive growth as we look ahead for the next 32 years. What do you see as the priorities for us as a city, as a county?
Well, thank you, Judy. First, I want to acknowledge Dan Cronin, my compatriot from DuPage, and Larry Walsh from Will, and Jack Franks from McHenry, and Chris Lausen from Kane. We all got together in 2013 and talked about how we might, as a region, work together, because the competition internationally these days is not between states or countries. It's really between regions. And we're competing against, the London and Beijing and Singapore and Tokyo. And we've got to figure out how to work together as a region. And starting in 2013, we've put together a collaborative, the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, which we formally kicked off in January. It's 7 counties in the city of Chicago. And we've been working on truck permitting as a logistical issue. We've been working on trying to help small and medium-sized firms export more because they have a better growth trajectory when they are involved in international markets and not just our domestic market. We've been talking about helping metal fabricating firms, which is a strength in all of the region. All of us are involved in metalworking, and foreign direct investment. So that's kind of been the menu of things that we've taken on as a challenge as a region. And all of us have been working hard to try to make our regional collaborative a success. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's participated. As I said, Dan and Larry and Jack are here today, but our group is all 7 counties. And I think that going forward, deepening that regional collaboration and partnership will be a real strength for our region. I want to just come back to something that Rose said about diversity. I'm a history teacher, and I always say, America is a great nation because people have come from all over the world to make it so. And I would just second his point that one of the great strengths of this region is its diversity and the fact that we have so much energy and talent in our region. Much of it comes from our immigrant communities, but we are very grateful, I think, and we should be very grateful, especially in this time, this troubled time in our country, that we have such a diverse region and we bring people with so many talents from so many different places together.
And speaking of Mr. Cronin, I'll just jump over here, DuPage County Board Chair, jumping in from the West Suburban point of view on this topic.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tony, for the shout out. And it is true. I mean, you mentioned it in your introduction and setting up the question. We're all really troubled by what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in Springfield. Just the partisan gridlock and just the tone and the fact that there hasn't been a lot happening, certainly not in a cooperative fashion. And so I feel even a greater responsibility since I took this position in 2010, working with partners. It's been marvelous working with Tony and working with Chris and working with, I see Richard Irvin is over there, and Larry and all of my counterparts from the region. And you say, well, that's just nice, political speak, Cronin, but no, we're adjusting to the new normal. The new normal is there's less money coming from the federal government. There's less money coming from Springfield. We have to pool our resources. We have to find efficiencies. I think one of the achievements that I think President Preckwinkle and I were able to come up with early on when I first started was Bussey Woods. Bussey Woods is an area in the Cook County Forest Preserve just sort of north of DuPage County, in the eastern part of DuPage County. For years and years and years, beginning back in the 70s, a lot of the leaders were seeking to hold the water and do some flood detention up there. And it was just partisan, just gridlock, just nobody could ever get it done. Tony came into office, we sat down, we talked. we were able to make the project. We were able to open up that region, and it actually turned out to be environmentally friendly. We were able to detain water, and what was the result of that? There were folks in Bensonville and Elmhurst and Villa Park and Oak Brook that had seen devastating flooding along the Salt Creek waterway for years. We finally solved the problem. I'm not looking for a pat on the back, but I'm saying that's what we have to be able to do, particularly in local government. It's about regional cooperation, pooling resources. I think one of the things that I'm sort of our brand of governance in DuPage is, trying to respond and adjust to the new normal. We got to do more with less. So we have a brand we call it our ACT initiative. We look at everything in county government through the prism of ACT, which is accountability, consolidation, transparency. And we've cut the budget every year. We've reduced headcount. We've abolished 7 units of local government. I don't know when the last time anybody's abolished a unit of local government anywhere, but we've done it in DuPage. We're not doing it because just for the sake of abolishing government. We're doing it because we have to be nimble. We're dealing with an opioid crisis now. We've got to repurpose dollars that may have been not so well spent on one of those local governments. Now we have to respond to the crisis of the day. So local government has to be collaborative, cooperative, and we've got to be nimble. And thank you so much for the chance to share some of these thoughts with you here today.
Well, let me bring in Lawrence Gonzalez. We're talking about, budgeting, and as we heard Clarence talk about earlier, don't show me your priorities or your values, show me your budget. So as we're talking and sitting on stage and talking about the plans and the policies going forward for the next 32 years, can we pay for this all? How do we do that? How do we tackle that?
Well, we start out, first of all, having leaders that both President Preckwinkle and President Cronin and the others that are willing to look at government differently, right? Looking at government as the answer to fixing these problems. We can't continue in Illinois to operate looking backwards. Just because we have created various levels and units of government, if they are not delivering the services that the citizens want, the next generation of citizens need. We've seen a great surge in the downtown area of Chicago with companies as well as with young people coming in. That would not happen if the government was not making those investments. Those have to be a priority. But a commitment to a plan, and that's why On to 2050 is so important. Because without a plan, you cannot hold your government accountable. Without a plan, you can't reach that consensus on what your priorities are and then make sure that your budgets reflect them. Yes, we are faced with a difficult situation in Illinois. We have been financially reckless. We have had 2 years, we're the only state in the United States without a budget. That had tremendous costs. But we also, as was been pointed out, have fantastic resources. The diversity of our citizens is something that we need to recognize and treasure, but it's also that we are not competing, as President Preckwinkle pointed out, we're not competing with Indiana and Wisconsin. We're competing with the world for whether we're going to be an international region, whether we're going to be able to continue that growth. So the most important thing is the 1,000 people that are here today. If they demand more from their government, if they demand that their government have a plan, the government and the elected officials will respond.
I want to focus now specifically on transportation. We have quite a few experts sitting on this panel. And we're going to tie in technology. Right now, we can't talk about transportation or really anything without tying in technology. If you heard in the news a couple of days ago, it's Facebook wanting to put a camera in your home. How many of you think that's a good idea? A couple of days ago, right, SpaceX landed in California. People thought it was the UFO. And all the stories about our phones listening to our conversations with us knowing. So you're all going to go home tonight. Mysterious articles are going to pop up about how to have a baby on the expressway because it's listening. But the question, though, as we look forward, is how do we harness all of those technological options in front of us and make it work for us? And then in terms of transportation, I'm looking straight ahead. I'm going to talk to Leanne Redden from the RTA. Let me just read a couple of numbers for everybody. And this was the headline last year, end of last year. It is official. New survey confirms Chicago has the worst commute time in the country, outranking Philly, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. The RTA, though, it's a system that serves 2 million riders each weekday in 6 counties. That's a lot. to take in. So as you look forward to 2050, technology, transportation, how do we harness all of that?
We're a big region. We're a very diverse region, and building off some of the stuff that was already said, we have some, transportation is that connection, right? That gets us to our jobs, to work, to play, whatever we want to do. Technology is here, to steal Dan's line, it is our new normal too. It's something that's impacting all of us, and it's impacting some of the more traditional transportation systems that we have, both on the road and the highway side, as well as the transit space. We have to do a better job of working in that space and living within that new normal, utilizing that technology to our own advantage as well. Better ways to get information out to customers on the transportation side, for example. But we also need to think about sort of collaboratively, how are we working with, some of the other technologies that are influencing very directly the transit system, like the transportation network companies, the Ubers and Lyfts, for example. How are we working with them and coordinating with them in the downtown urban areas where they're actually sometimes adding to congestion, but how are we maybe partnering with them in some of the outer-lying areas where we don't necessarily have density to serve in a transit space very well? I think that technology it's here, it's real, it's what we're facing. It doesn't change the world that we live in. I think it's important though, as we think about sort of bright and shiny new technology, we also need to think about sort of what's the core, what's the bare bones, or what's the backbone of our transportation network. And that is the transit system and the highway and the broader infrastructure network. And we can't forget that. So we've got to make sure we're continuing to invest in the great assets that this region has. This region was built on the backbone of transportation. It is a transportation hub. And we can't forget about that asset and those resources that we have. We need to build from there and then work in technology and other features as we move forward.
And I'm going to bring in ComEd right now, and you talk about how difficult, I know we're all experts sitting here, but how difficult is it to foresee our needs, 32 years from now in 2050? How are we all going to be electric vehicles on the road? Are we going to be flying vehicles? I don't know if we even use electricity anymore. How do you anticipate that? What do you see, from ComEd's perspective going forward?
Well, when we talk about the utility of the future, that's exactly what we're referring to. We're referring to the technological advancements that we've seen around, I'm putting my Lavelle back on.
The microphone?
Yeah. We've seen around, there we go.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
That's
All right.
Yes.
We talk about the rapid change that we've seen in our industry around technology.
Yeah.
So utility of future, we've used that term now for about 5-6 years. I would probably argue that the utility of future is here and now, and it's a model that is really built on collaboration. So in my role, we're in the communities, and in ComEd's territory, we have over 400 municipalities that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And what we try to do is understand the needs of that community and then also make adjustments and anticipate what that need will be and how we can serve them. And that change that we've experienced comes from changing customer expectations as well as changes in technology. And I'll give you an example of how we are trying to demonstrate the model of connecting communities and using their input to prioritize and also anticipate what that need will be down the road. So in Bronzeville, we launched a strategy called Community of the Future in Bronzeville, and we work with a group of residents, day-to-day grassroots people that are focused on improving the community and sustainability efforts. And we just meet with them and we get an understanding of what their priorities are, and then we try to match resources in with those needs. Because oftentimes when you talk about community engagement, the engagement is there, but there's often not the resources. And so we try to leverage the resources as well as the expertise that we have available to us to connect the two. And what we found is that we've been able to identify things that address day-to-day needs, such as economic development, safety, engaging their students in the community, and helping them participate in this technology that we're seeing. We recently had a job fair in the community in which we brought 50 partners who had jobs in technology and other things that we work with. We couldn't, of course, provide all the jobs, but we leveraged our partnerships and collaborations to bring that to them. But what we're finding is that innovation comes in process. Innovation comes in engagement, and that's how we're getting access to the needs and the information that we rely on to anticipate what's coming down the line, because we'll also use Bronzeville as a test bed to bring different technologies to see how they interact with each other. And right now we're starting at Bronzeville, but we believe this model is something that can be used across all of our municipalities in different ways.
I want to go back to the revenue for a little bit, our favorite subject. But you heard Clarence mention earlier, I don't know if you all caught that number, it was a pretty big number, $24 billion with a B. We're talking a $24 billion shortfall over the next 30 years, simply trying to maintain the transportation system that we have today. Now, if you account into modest improvements, that gap grows to $56 billion in the next 30 years. I mean, those are crazy numbers. I'm going to start right here and have Chairman Cronin tackle that. How do we start that conversation as a region to properly fund what we need?
Well, we have been talking, the regional leadership at the CMAP forum, and we've really been scratching our heads. We've listened to a lot of presentations. I mean, I think everybody recognizes that all the old rules, the playbook, you know, motor fuel tax, the way things have been done in the past are not going to be the way they're going to be done in the future. And how we fund roads, how we measure progress, how we make inroads into communities, how we connect different economies, all of this is very, very challenging. But I think from my perspective in DuPage County, we've been working really hard to do our part. We have been maintaining our infrastructure on a very, very frugal budget. We've been maintaining the roads and the bridges. We've been plowing. We've been taking care of things, the streams, the natural waterways. We've called on our friends at Metro who have raised the fares on suburban commuters. We've been doing our part. I think it's time that we call on the leadership in Springfield and Washington, D.C. to demonstrate some leadership. We have good ideas. We have a lot of ideas about how to come forward with some of the ways to fund these projects. But it takes leadership, and it's going to take some folks to stand up and maybe take a little bit of a risk politically. But I think when it was time to build the Elgin O'Hare, and when it was time to talk about Western access, and Governor Quinn gathered leaders from the suburban area, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, Cronin, I think you're going to have to stand up there first and say you're in favor of raising the toll." You remember that, Rodney Craig? You're nodding your head. And I was the guy that had, I'm not patting myself on the back, but I think we all recognized that there was something very, very important at stake here. You know, the potential, the economic development potential of opening up the western side of O'Hare. We have Liz Gorman here from the tollway. We're building that toll road now. We're going around the perimeter, and we have an east-west roadway that will go into O'Hare. So it was worth it to raise the tolls, and the people understood. They understood it, and there was little or no objection to taking a freeway, Elgin O'Hare, and turning it into a tollway, because people understood what the jobs and the economic development potential were. That was an easy one. I think if people can get up and stand up and explain what the potential, infrastructure is so vitally important to communities and to their vitality. It's so vitally important to jobs and economic growth. We are so far lagging behind, and we're not realizing, not even coming close to our potential in many areas throughout the region. So I think it's going to require leadership. I think it's going to require all of us in this room coming forward and speaking together with one voice and calling on our leadership in Springfield and in Washington, D.C. We need a capital bill, and it's been far, far too long.
President Preckwinkle, what's your reaction to that? A $56 billion gap that we're talking about in the next 30 years.
Well, just to piggyback on the last point that Dan made, it's definitely true that we need a capital bill in Springfield. Just no doubt about it. As he said, we haven't had one for a decade. And as a result, we've built up, you know, all of this deferred maintenance in our infrastructure, and that's really bad. I mean, infrastructure investments are economic development investments. And all of us need to understand that. When we raised the sales tax in Cook County in July of 2015, we did it for 3 reasons. One, to meet our pension obligations, because we were kicking the can down the road on our unfunded liabilities. The second thing was to stop diverting our motor fuel tax money away from infrastructure and into other permissible but non-infrastructure investments in public safety, for example, and also to invest in technology. And we basically increased our expenditures in infrastructure about $45 million a year. And we've used that money not just on roads and bridges, but on bike trails, on transit stations, now on a freight flyover to try to mitigate congestion in our region, where we have a T intersection between east-west and north-south rail lines at the 75th Street Corridor Improvement Project. So we've dramatically increased our investments in infrastructure, and as I said, I look at those as economic development investments. And to come back to Lawrence's point, we kind of got to where we are with a broader view of transportation to include, as I said, bike trails and pedestrian trails and freight through a long-range transportation planning process. We have a long-range transportation plan that has guided us as we look toward investments that we need to make going forward. And so that plan is a way of holding ourselves accountable, and we took the tough decision to raise revenue so that we could invest more ourselves. To come back to Dan's point, we're in an era in which local units of government are going to have to struggle to figure out how to meet a lot of our needs ourselves. Although, as I concur with him, we definitely need to go to Springfield about a capital bill in this next session.
I'm going to have Lawrence jump in for a second here. You agree with what you're hearing right here?
Definitely. We need greater recognition that we have to continue to invest in our region. We are not investing. We have allowed the deferred maintenance to go off the charts. Chairman Cronin mentioned that.
All of the above.
Sorry.
All of the above.
All of them. Chairman Cronin mentioned that, Metro raised fares. That was a short-term plug for a bigger problem, because you cannot rely on the fare box anywhere else to basically generate the type of revenue that's needed to maintain the Metro service, the Metro rail system. We need a comprehensive plan for how we're going to meet the needs, not just onto 2050, because we're not meeting the needs right now. We need the public to express, and surveys and public opinion polls show what people want is access to great public transportation and great public education. Illinois has been falling down on that. We have not raised the gas tax since 1991, and most of the people who buy gas would tell you they haven't noticed the difference, that we're somehow saving them something. So there needs to be education, there needs to be understanding, but there needs to be a recognition that if you failure to invest in this critical infrastructure, hurts every facet of our region.
I'm going to bring one chair down to Raul. So when we come back to the communities and about fair access, Lawrence mentioned fair access, equal access to transportation, to housing. What is your perspective when you listen to that huge number when it comes to the budget shortfall, but yet we're talking about inclusive investment and equity in reinvesting?
Well, first of all, I agree that you cannot pass on $56 billion onto the writer or the consumer in terms of the needs that are out there, given that there is housing costs that families have to deal with, education costs, food, and other things that are eating up their disposable income. If we don't have the right investments for public transportation, it's going to be a challenge. And this is where I think the future of this plan is going to be very interesting, because, one would say we are in an era where technology, transportation, public transport intersecting with the invention of the car sharing businesses, if you will, right? Some might call it's being self-funded. That last mile is being self-funded. Or some might call it the lazy mile is being self-funded. So there's interest by consumers to want better transportation, not having that last mile funded. They're turning to Ubers, to Lyfts, and so forth. But I think there's an opportunity to figure out how the investment, not just on the bricks and mortar, but on the technology for the future ridership is important. Less and less young people are selecting to be drivers. I have an 18-year-old son who doesn't want to get a driver's license. I'm sure that this is sort of a trend. It'd be interesting to see what's going to happen in the future. But I'll leave it to the planners at CMAP And I'm looking at the audience, and I wanted a shout out to my fellow ex-board members. I was part of the original CMAP board, and they've done tremendous work in listening to the community about what these plans are going to be. But again, the key here is the collaboration, finding new resources, and making sure that this is not passed on to the consumer.
And speaking of children, of course, the one thing that parents talk about nowadays, right? Jobs of the future. What's going to be there when our kids grow up to 20, 30, 40, and 50? We've interviewed so many experts who say that jobs that our kids are going to have don't exist today. A majority of those jobs don't even exist today. So as we look ahead, I'm going to have Melissa jump in real quick here and talk about, so when it comes to the workforce and preparing the workforce for the future, what are we looking at, and what are you thinking?
So we come at it at ComEd from several different perspectives. One perspective is around, quite frankly, workforce development and also economic development. So from an economic development perspective, reliable electricity is normally not the only leading point when you're trying to attract a business to this region, but it is definitely a point that people review when they're determining where they're going to place their businesses. So we view our role of providing reliable service as the most essential way that we can be supportive to the region. And that's why you've seen a growth in data centers coming to this region, because as a result of the investment from the EMA bill that was passed in 2011, we've been able to invest in the grid and improve reliability to the point to where we've had 3 record-breaking years of improved reliability, and that's an attraction. So if you've got the businesses coming here, that creates the economic development that you need. The second way that we look at that, as a result of that investment, came along significant jobs. And we wanted to make sure that the people that were being placed into those jobs were diverse candidates, as well as people who traditionally had access to those opportunities, especially in the construction and trade organizations and jobs. And what we were hearing is that people felt that they weren't getting access to those jobs. And so we created a program called Construct that we place every year about, it's grown. It started out with about 30 people. Now our last class last April had over 100 people in it, because what we do is bring people in, introduce them to the trades, give them the skill sets that they need to compete for these jobs. We also work with other companies that have opportunities and jobs that will place them into roles once they complete the training. And we've had great success in growing that. 100 may not sound like a lot, but when you think about the lives that you're transforming one at a time, it makes a difference. And I think that what we've seen is that there's a continued need to have that collaboration between the nonprofit organizations that we work with to conduct the training and help prepare people for those jobs and for those roles, as well as the industry on the other end that's willing to hire in once they complete their training. We're maximizing that in terms of jobs of the future as a result of the Future Energy Jobs Act that was passed at the end of 2016. That legislation will expand significantly the amount of solar that we have in our region. And I know that many of you that are in Grundy County, Kankakee County, and others are getting a lot of phone calls right now from developers wanting to probably place solar in your region. But it's also rooftop solar on individuals and businesses, and it's also community solar, which will bring solar right into your community, even if you don't own a home, so that all can participate. And that's where we expect growth in jobs. And the training is available to help people understand what opportunities they have in solar.
I'm going to ask President Preckwinkle to tackle this one too, who used to be a teacher, as all of you know, about preparing the future workforce.
Well, let me talk about a partnership and a collaboration. Shortly after Mayor Emanuel was elected and I had just come into office, we looked together at how we could cooperate because there hadn't been much sharing or connection or cooperation and collaboration between the city and the county, although we share a building downtown. And one of the ways in which we decided we could work together was around employment training. And we created an entity, the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, which instead of being a government entity, either the city or the county, is a not-for-profit organization, and all the federal resources that used to come to the city and to the county went now to the not-for-profit, which could accept, in addition to government support, philanthropic and corporate support. And they have been placing around 10,000 people in jobs every year. So over the last 7 years, they've placed 70,000 people. And we are beginning to look at, in addition to sort of the traditional programs that the federal government supports, programs to support disconnected youth, young people 16 to 24 who are neither in school nor in the workforce. And unfortunately, in Cook County, there are tens of thousands of those young people. So we have a program called Opportunity Works that addresses those young people and helps them get internship experience and then hopefully moves them into unsubsidized employment. But we've got to figure out how to connect particularly young people who, as I said, are neither in school or at work into the workforce. And that's a real challenge, as well as the challenge of helping the kids who are high school graduates or kids who are college graduates find a pathway to a productive work life. So we've got some real challenges in terms of what we traditionally do and sort of what the emerging needs are. And this young population, 16 to 24, disconnected youth, is clearly an area where we have to try to find programs to address.
Thank you. And we literally have, I think, 2 or 3 minutes left. So I'm going to go down the line, starting with Leanne at the end. Any closing thoughts? Are we on the right trajectory? Any closing images, remarks you want to leave everybody with? We have about 60 seconds each. We'll come down the line.
We have a great infrastructure network, a great transportation network. We have an employment base that employers are coming here looking for the great talent pool that we have. Transportation is that connection to get people to and from those jobs. We need to invest. Everybody talked about investing, and it really is an investment because there's a return on those dollars spent back into the region's economy. The transportation network, pun intended, really drives that economy.
Lawrence?
There's so much in the plan that I think is to be lauded, but I think we need to recognize that the pursuit of the perfect answer for funding our government, for funding it, is not always the possible answer. So while there might be mileage-based taxes and things like that we'd like to see experimentation on, we need to be funding our government and funding our infrastructure now. By not investing in our infrastructure now, we're not protecting what we have. And so commend everyone who's been a part of the CMAP in this effort, but also encourage everyone in the room. You have to demand more of your government. You have to demand more in terms of investment, technology, and the results that you want.
Aaron, Raul?
I think in addition to investing in the infrastructure or the bricks and mortar projects, we need to invest in the social fabric of communities, the people themselves. I'm looking forward to this region being more diverse, but at the same time more integrated, and breaking down some of the hyper-segregation that exists sometimes in the city or suburbs. But that only got to happen not just investing in infrastructure or bricks and mortar. We've got to figure out how to invest in the social fabric and people. Somebody mentioned earlier about what happens in the west side of Chicago has an impact on what happens in the northwest side suburbs, or vice versa when it comes to education, crime, and other things that are important to the region as we move forward. And I think that's critical, that we look at the social fabric, building on the assets of the neighborhoods, both tangible and non-tangible.
I know, so I said just a closing argument, but I have a follow-up question to Raul. But, but do you feel like the community, the sense is that they feel the government is responsive?
I think there's new, as I look at, as you saw from the video, I started this organization almost 30 years ago. And there's, I think, a new sense of leadership today on younger people looking for that collaboration. They're demanding that of themselves. It's the generation that I believe is more socially conscious. They're more blind towards race, if you will. And I think that bodes well for pushing our leaders in government to make sure they collaborate better, because those barriers are being broken down than what we had before. And I think that's good. And I think that's what I'm looking forward, and that's where we need to invest in that kind of leadership.
Melissa, closing thoughts?
I definitely think the 2050 plan is on track to where we need to go, because it involves private, public, as well as community and nonprofit engagement. And I think the impact will be magnified. And clearly you'll have an understanding of prioritization, impact, and engagement that will help result in the end result that you're trying to drive. I also think that equity and investment is very important. The other hat I wear is that I serve on the board for the Metropolitan Planning Council, and they've done studies that show that based upon the cost of segregation is the name of the study, but if you have inequity in your investment, we all pay. You know, so you need to really focus on that.
President Preckwinkle.
Just to follow up on Melissa's point and the cost of segregation work that the Metropolitan Planning Council has done. You know, when we look at regions, those regions that have the least inequality are the most economically vibrant. But the ones that have the least inequality. And unfortunately in our region there's tremendous inequality, which is one of the things that drags our growth. So we really have to look carefully at this issue of equity and try to address it in our planning going forward.
Chairman Cronin.
Just want to commend CMAP and all the leaders in this room. Thank you, President Preckwinkle, for your leadership for Cook County, the largest county, one of the largest, if not the largest in the nation. This is a very, very important region. 2050 is a fabulous plan. We've participated at our level in our meetings to talk about how we get to the infrastructure needs. I just want to commend everybody who came here today. Let's stick together. Let's speak with one voice. Let's call on Springfield. Let's call on Washington. Let's make some progress. Let's get it done.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap up our panel up here. How about a big round of applause for everybody? Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Wow, and I was watching my time the entire time because I listened to what Clarence said about I will, and I said I will keep the panel on time, so thank you. But truly appreciate all of their perspective, and you heard it all right there. The repeated theme, keeping everyone accountable, right, as we go through the next 32 years. So we just heard a lot about the need for action and also collaboration from the government to private to the community. Now we're going to hear how the city of Chicago and its 284 suburbs can work individually and collectively to implement on to 2050. Mayor Rahm Emanuel was elected in 2011 and re-elected in 2015. He was born and raised in the city. He's also been a congressman and served as White House Chief of Staff under President Barack Obama, and the mayor is making his way up here on stage. We also want to introduce and bring on stage right now the mayor from Palos Hills, Jerry Bennett. Mayor Bennett is one of the longest serving mayors here in the state of Illinois with some 38 years of service to Palos Hills. He has also served for nearly 13 years as the founding chairman of the board of CMAP. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome our two mayors here on stage. Mayor Bennett, Mayor Emanuel, always good to see you. The podium is yours.
Thanks for that introduction. Appreciate that. I'm going to be basically really quick on a couple things. When I first became mayor, I asked McKinsey and Brookings Institute to do a study of Chicago's economy, look at the last 10 years, and then point out next 10 years what we need to do as an economy for the city of Chicago and our area, what we have to do, what we have to invest in, what our strengths are, what our challenges are, but how to make those opportunities. Around the same time, Economist Magazine, IBM, A.T. Kearney all came out with reports rating Chicago globally, but all cities globally. And in all the reports, I identified the same strengths. One, Chicago is the second most competitive economy in North America. And the only city on the top 10 list is the city of Chicago is either 9th, 8th, or 7th on the list worldwide. And what was fascinating to me, we were the only city on that list that was not the financial or political capital of the respective country. And given Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, I'm kind of happy we're not on that list with those strengths. But you have those, that's a cheap line, but thanks for the applause. That said, Chicago's economy is the most diverse economy in the United States and therefore also the most diversified economy in the world. No sector drives more than 14% of our employment. In addition to that effort, Chicago's economy is metro economy is the 21st largest economy in the globe. We could join the G20. I've been to the meetings, they're not exciting, so don't worry about it. But every one of them I identified, and what we've come up with is our economic plan. I call it the 5 T's: talent, training, transportation, technology, and transparency. And if you invest in those 5 things, your economy will grow, be competitive. 5 years in a row, #1 city for corporate relocations in the United States, Chicago. 6 years in a row, the #1 city for direct foreign investment in the United States, Chicago. That's a $4 trillion global market. Last year, London, #1. Paris, #2. Singapore, #3. Amsterdam, #4. Chicago, #5. The only city in the United States on the top 10 list worldwide for direct foreign investment. I think you can conclude it's not because I have a charming, winning personality. Because we're willing to invest in our strengths. And one of those strengths, if it runs on rails, roads, or runways, it comes in and out of this city. That's why Chicago's O'Hare, rated #1 best connected airport in the United States, 2nd in the world, and the modernization of O'Hare, the modernization of Midway, is so essential for our economic competitiveness. We have made a tremendous amount of investments in our mass transit system, our roads, our bike lanes. I've asked the Mobility Task Force to come in and start to think about the future. When I ran for mayor, we were talking about CTA, maybe bike sharing. Today there are issues like driverless vehicles. Today there are issues all along, not about bike sharing, but about a bike system and scooters, things that were not talked about 7 years, and that is not slowing up. So we're starting to plan about that future. But all of us together know what the role of infrastructure, or more importantly, transportation, is for the city of Chicago and the larger Chicago economy. We've made an unprecedented $8.5 billion capital investment in the mass transit system here in the city of Chicago. This November, December, we will finish the Red Line South, all 11 miles of track, every station, and open up the last piece of the 95th Street station with the Astor Gates' artwork. And then we will begin the red-purple modernization for the rest of the route. So from Evanston to 95th Street will all be new. The piece on the red-purple modernization, this organization was essential for that funding, like the federal government, and creating for the first time ever in the city of Chicago a transportation TIF. We went from 10th in this country of best bike cities to #1, and we've added 200 miles of protected bike lanes. This organization and CMAQ essential. We took an old rail track that people have been talking about for 40 years, and now it's a 606, and it's led to a great, tremendous economic organization and development because of this organization. The Washington Wabash, the first mega station in the downtown area, built because of this organization. Now you cannot get, and I've said this about Donald Trump's infrastructure bill, I would love to have it happen, but you can't get from here to there without resources. We're the only city and state, we're the only state in the Midwest that hasn't passed an infrastructure bill in the last 10 years. And we are in our economy, since we are the transportation, distribution, logistic hub of the United States. 1/3 of China's air cargo into the United States, O'Hare. Comes right here. 6 of the 7 major rail lines for the United States through Chicago. If you're thinking about one-time delivery, one-day delivery, Chicago. So I would urge all of us, not just to advocate for a transportation bill in Springfield. Nothing's going to happen in Washington. Forget about it. Been there, done that. Ain't going to go there. But I think we should speak as one voice, not just to push for a transportation bill in Springfield, but set a deadline. That if it doesn't pass by May, this greater region will do our own transportation bill with CMAQ. I have all the optimism with a new vote, new election, that we can actually get a transportation bill. I have hope for Springfield to get it done. I think we should speak with a uniform voice, and that before the resources to get it done. You can't do it on the cheap. We're not building the Red Line on the cheap. We're not building O'Hare on the cheap. It costs resources. But every way we do that, Chicago's unemployment has dropped more than the 10 largest cities in the United States last year, our unemployment. In the last 8 years, our unemployment rate has dropped more than the 5 biggest cities in the United States. In technology, outside of Silicon Valley, we're the #1 city for tech jobs over the last year or two. I'm saying this not because I don't think Springfield will do it, but we have waited for 10 years, all of us, to try to figure out through chewing gum, glue, super glue, to try to figure out how to build a transportation system, and it's essential for the economic growth and jobs. But my view is really clear. They're not going to do it. The major economy of the state of Illinois, the metro Chicago economy, the 21st largest economy in the world, we need to be able to be ready to chart a separate individual course, because our livelihood, the livelihood of the jobs, small, medium, large, the economy of this area, the quality of life of this area, the residents and the citizens that we represent are dependent on it. Springfield, wake up and let's get to work. Let's put people to work. You can't outsource this work. You're not going to do it. We're ready to do it on behalf of the people we represent. That, to me, is the right course. And guess what? If they thought that would happen, they'd get a bill done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank the City of Chicago for your cooperation with this organization. They've got a clock on the floor, and we were supposed to get 5 minutes each. It's down to 1 minute, so Mayor, thank you for...
I have 10 more minutes I'd like to say.
Yeah, okay. Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, you've been sitting here for 2 hours, so I'm going to make this to the point. I have been honored over the last 13 years to chair this organization. But for all of you to understand, when you go back 38 years, because I can go back 38 years as the mayor, walking out my door into my town, but more importantly, walking into the region, and seeing that there's a big world out there in need of cooperation. So when you think back 38 years ago, what existed out there were about 9 councils of governments, each dotted throughout the region. And we all worked collectively, sub-regionally. And it was through the formation of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus almost 18 years ago that brought us all together. That certainly brought the mayors, 284 mayors throughout this region together. And collectively began to think, how can we benefit the entire metro region? And from the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, that's how CMAP was formed. It was a combination of the old NIPSI organization and Chicago Transportation Study. And collectively, when we sat down back in 2005 to bring this organization together, it was a struggle. And think about it, because now we're including the 7 counties throughout the region. There's a lot of political bodies, a lot of political boundaries. But I think what we accomplished back in 2005 was, in fact, truly to put together a regional consensus in how we go about not just transportation, but the critical point of land planning. We had a great original executive director in Randy Blankenhorn, who brought us together along with an incredible staff. And back almost 10 years ago now, we launched the 2040 plan. And I think in that plan, the day that we announced that plan, in a room similar to this, fortunately, Senator Durbin was able to provide us almost $3.5 million in HUD money, which we parlayed then into serving almost 200 different communities over the last few years with these local technical assistance grants, which was the core of what we were all about, for towns and cities and villages to start thinking outside the box, that it couldn't be the same how we developed our communities, that we needed to look at new ways in providing the necessary quality of life issues, whether it was in transportation or housing or in the environment, open lands. That came together back in 2010 when we released 2040. And now that we've come to you again in releasing the 2050 plan, we ask again that the mayors, who again, this organization was built from the bottom up, that when we formed this organization, it was going to be an organization basically of mayors and county chairs. And it's worked. And I can certainly stand here and tell you that now over the 13 years, how this area has come together. Again, you look at 32 years ago, you look at since 2005, what this region has done, and because of the work of CMAP, and now as we release our 2050 plan going forward, we ask all of you to participate in that. We wish we had more funding, and sitting up here listening to person political leader after political leader talking about the need of funding. It is so critical. And I think, again, if you look at the collective body of this region, the city of Chicago and 284 municipalities, 7 counties, 8 million people, that we can't go to Springfield and say, enough is enough, and now we need some funding to get our plan going. It's so critical. And finally, just to say to the current board members who are sitting here today, some of the past mayors that served on the board, to our county board chairmen, to thank you. Thank you for continuing the work that we need to put together a world-class region. Well, I truly believe, Mayor, that we are one of the greatest metropolitan cities or metropolitan regions in the world, and that's been done by collective thinking and collective action. Also to our nonprofits that are out there, to the business community, and most importantly to the staff of CMAP. We were able to bring in some bright young people 13 years ago, and we continue to do that on a daily basis, to ask them to think outside the box, how we're going to plan our urban areas going forward, and they've done an incredible job. And the effect of what this organization has done, and even looking at our former executive director, now Secretary of Transportation, even Randy brought those principles to IDOT, and it's changed. And once you begin that change, I think you can't stop the momentum. So again, on behalf of the Board of Directors, on behalf of all the partners in the region, thank you for being here today, and we all look forward to going on to 2050. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Bennett and Mayor Emanuel. Your leadership for a strong region is commended. And you're not alone. Today, nearly a quarter of the region's municipalities are represented here in the audience today. And CMAP stands ready to support you and all of the 284 communities in achieving strong quality of life and economic growth. And so I'm pleased to announce that one of the first implementation activities of On to 2050 will be enhancing our technical assistance program to local communities, particularly those that may lack the capacity to best help themselves. A John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation grant to CMAP for $500,000 will be complemented by a $200,000 Chicago Community Trust grant to CMAP, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and Metropolitan Planning Council. And these funds will help support CMAP and our partners' technical assistance to capacity-constrained communities. So please join me in thanking the MacArthur Foundation and the Chicago Community Trust for their commitment. So before we close today's program, I want to thank all of our speakers once more for inspiring us into action. I want to thank Judy, our MC, for keeping the program lively and on point. And I want to thank my CMAP colleagues, as well as our committee and board members in the MPO Policy Committee. You've all logged so many hours in the development of On to 2050, and your service to improving the place we call home is truly commendable. Likewise, it would be a very different plan without the active support from IDOT Secretary Randy Blankenhorn. And under his leadership, as the chairman had mentioned, IDOT has put into place so many of the recommendations that were part of the Go to 2040 plan. And finally, let me thank all of you in the audience. Many of you are already engaged in the work of implementing On to 2050. So I hope everyone has been inspired today to get involved. There's work from everybody, from the philanthropists to the CEOs to the elected officials to the local planners, from religious leaders to residents. So now together, let's go on to 2050. To close today, we've asked an a cappella choir from the Lindblom Math and Science Academy in Chicago's Englewood community to sing us out. And make sure you stay after we sing Happy Birthday to enjoy some cake. But before we get to the choir, I'd like to introduce John Hatcher Jr. John was 8 years old when Go to 2040 was adopted, and he took part in the launch event at that time. So today, at age 16, he continues to excel. Earlier this year, he won the AGAP Connections Regional Oratory Competition. And as John comes up on stage to give us his words, his vision for the future, please watch, hopefully we're not embarrassing you, please watch this short clip of him from 2010, reflecting as a child on what would make the region better.
My name is John Hatcher Jr., and I am 8 years old. The reason I care about the future is I want God's creations to live on a long time. I like my grandmother's neighborhood better than my neighborhood because there are sidewalks and I don't have to ride on the curb. People are not saying bad words, and you can relax and ride and have fun.
Thank you, Joe and CMAP, for giving me this amazing opportunity. As a junior in high school, the #1 question I am constantly asked is, John, do you know what you're going to do with your life? And as you can expect from a procrastinating, uncertain teenager, I say, I don't know. All jokes aside, writing this speech has forced me to face something that I have been trying to put off for the longest: the future. When we think about the future, we tend to think about it in two ways: hope that it will be better than our present, and fear that things will only get worse. Either way, the future is cloudy. It's the great unknown. And yes, that's something I found myself afraid of when I considered the question, what will my future be like? As a young Black male, the Bureau of Justice Statistics states that I have a 1 in 3 chance of being incarcerated while continuing to face discrimination as I pursue my education and enter the workplace. As On to 2050 points out, Black people in this region are far less likely to go to college, to get a job, or even make a living wage. Writing this speech has also forced me to face the future of my community. Today, my community lacks the resources that it needs. For example, I don't even go to school where I live. I commute to a school in another community because I believe it has the education I need to be successful. When I think about growing up, graduating college, and making a life for myself, I can't say that I envision myself going back home to my own community. I envision living somewhere safe, with places to shop and even a good job nearby. But yet, my community lacks these resources. But I believe every community should have the resources and investments it needs to be the kind of place a person wants to go back to when he grows up. You may not look like me or live in a community like mine, but make no mistake, this problem affects us all. When we write someone off because of the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status, we waste the potential of people like me. And when we don't ensure that every community is thriving, we squander our potential as a region. Yet too often, we let the boundaries of our differences keep us from reaching out, person to person, community to community. These boundaries do nothing but hold us back. Unless we all take a stand together, they will persist, and so will the challenges we face as a region. The inspirational stories you've heard today will only matter if we choose to look outside of ourselves, take on someone else's pain and suffering as our own, and begin the long walk of solidarity. The cold, hard truth is this: the day we accept things the way they are is the day we stop moving forward completely. But I'm not willing to let that happen. When I think about my future, I want to think about it with hope. And when I think about the Chicago region with its limitless diversity, I believe it is the perfect place to start the change that America so desperately needs. I am not willing to be a statistic, but I am willing to be part of the solution. The only question that remains is, will you stand with me? Yes, our problems are complex, but that is all the more reason to work together toward a more inclusive and peaceful 2050.